So, welcome. Thank you for coming to the podcast, Justin McCarthy. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and StrongDM? Because I mean, I've been working with you and your team for a couple weeks now. I just got introduced to your company. I didn't even know that this was even in the PAM space. So it's really cool to see kind of a different PAM tool that's not the typical just, oh, we do vaulting, right? So you guys take it to a whole new level. So kind of tell me a little bit about yourself and a little bit about StrongDM. We'll kick things off there.
Sure thing. All right. So yeah, my name is Justin, co-founder and CTO at StrongDM. And yeah, as you noted, we are a product that helps people really get to the most privileged, most important use cases in the most convenient, most secure way possible. I think you also noted that, a sort of vault orientation, that's a little bit of sort of the tradition of the space. You can think of it as, I guess today we call them password managers. There is an enterprise password manager aspect to how other folks approach it. I think our sort of philosophy is really leading with convenience for that end user while retaining all the audit is the thing that's going to get you ultimately to adopt and comply with some of these controls. So that's just
right there,
one of the
convenience
yeah, sure.
to the end user. That to me is what sets you apart by far to everyone else. When I saw that kind of the GUI thing that popped up on the desktop, I'm like, oh yeah, now watch, I grant you the role, and boom, here's everything. I was like, what is that?
Yep.
That was amazing.
Yeah, it's much less of hurdles and much more of sort of chutes and ladders. Like you're gonna get in the chute, and we're gonna take you to the place you need to be. And of course, we're capturing everything as it's going. So that's the idea, and I think that's what we found. Like when folks just have an easy, straightforward, right in front of them, one-click way to get to that Kubernetes cluster or get to that DB2 database or get to that.
So that's another thing you do.
Yeah,
is you're not just credential management. You're not just saying, hey, look, here's a username and password that you've checked out. You actually have like a whole socket tunnel open to the actual service on the back end. So you can say, hey, look, I'm going to connect you to a database, not just a server that then you can just go and then launch the admin console for the database in there.
Yeah, I think there's a reality that all of our apps are in the cloud now, but it turns out our staff is not in the cloud yet. Our staff is still at home or in the coffee shop, and so because you're not on the network of wherever that container is running or that application is running, you need to get there somehow. Okay.
Yeah.
And so we made a product decision a long time ago to do some of the same vertical integration. You can think of any of the famous brands that have done a lot of vertical integration, like Apple or Tesla, and decided that in order to control the experience, you kind of got to build the whole thing. And so that's the position that we took. That getting you that network, that first mile and last mile, is part of the problem, and it's part of how you end up with a proliferation of provisioning where you need a VPN and something else and the password vault. We're just collapsing all of that into one entity.
Yeah.
So,
and just to be clear, like, I'm not a customer of yours, I'm not a partner of yours, I'm in no way financially tied to your company. It's just I just saw you guys for the first time just a few weeks ago. This is just I just want everyone to know, like, this is non-biased in the sense that I just really like what you guys are doing, because it's the biggest problem with PAM to me, from implementing it over I think the first time I implemented PAM was probably about 7-8 years ago over at Standard & Poor's. And since then, it's just been a fight with the end user. They're like, oh, well, I got all my scripts and I got this and I got these things on my desktop, and now I got to go to this web interface and check out the thing and use this pop-up Java terminal to connect. And it's just like, that's the biggest headache. And then every administrator, because they're going to figure out a way around it, and they're going to go around it. But you've made it so simple to where it's like, hey, this thing just pops up. It's like, oh, I can just go and I can do what I need to do.
Yeah. If I mean, it's easy to say and hard to do, but if you make the easiest path the most, the safest path, then I think you're gonna have a better time. So yeah, that's what we're always pursuing, and then we're pursuing it across everything that administrator is responsible for, right? So it's not just a one Windows remote desktop connection or an SSH connection here and there, or just the root account for the Cisco router or whatever. It's everything. So it's everything that administrator is saying, you know what, this is a privileged case. We have a compliance obligation. We have an audit obligation. Well, that's in scope.
So tell me about like your logging capabilities of that privileged access while that tunnel or that connection is open. Like, what's kind of going on behind the scenes there?
Yeah, so this is I have a long list of things that, I wish we could have bought off the shelf. I wish I could have gone to Walmart and just bought this SKU. But because it didn't exist off the shelf, we had to build it ourselves. So part of that is exactly it's understanding what's happening inside the pipe. Okay, so in the case of, for example, Linux, a typical Linux, remote session, that means just every character of the terminal interaction. Okay, but when you think about, for example, a database session, that's going to have a very different character. Okay, so
Right.
in those cases, we're talking queries, right? Or in the case of talking to a Kubernetes cluster, it's actually going to be a combination. So it's going to be this set of API calls happened, and then someone launched an interactive session, and then that someone deployed these new set of pods. So really taking what in Wireshark would look like just bytes and turning it
Yep.
into meaning is a key part of what we're always doing. So we're giving you back really semantically enriched recording of what's happening, not just bytes, not just that a session happened. We're telling you what happened within that session.
Yeah, you can actually do something because everyone else, I don't say everyone, but the majority, the big leaders in the space, they're recording like there's just recording the desktop. Like if you're logging to Windows, they're recording the desktop, or they're returning the terminal session or whatever. And that's great because you can go back and look. But man, are you just spending a ton of time and effort and cost recording an entire screen of someone's mouse moving around and clicking on things? And how do you search that? How do you say, hey, in the last 14 days, what did this guy do with his elevated account? It's like, well, I'm gonna have to pay someone to go and watch the videos and scrub through it. Like, so do you
Right.
have like filtering? Can you rate certain things on a risk score? So like, hey, show me all the high risk things this person's done or low risk things like that.
Yeah. So what I would say is our first obligation is to make those enriched sources so that, like, let's say you already have a really good scoring system that you're happy with in Splunk or another SIM.
Mhm.
You're gonna be able to use the events that are coming out of our system. Okay. And then of course we have APIs, right? So that's the next layer, like where if you want to write your own, we're gonna help you with that. And then we do have some within our advanced insights package. We do have some capability currently and more coming, of course, to really start to bundle some of that end-to-end analysis for you. So I would say more to come on that. Nothing that I can announce today, but more to come for sure.
Cool. That's pretty awesome. So, okay, so let's talk about future stuff, not necessarily with your particular product, but just in the PAM space in general. Where do you kind of see privileged access management in the next 3 to 5 years? Because I'm seeing a lot of passwordless come into play, and a lot of enterprise are pushing for passwordless now that it's become kind of the, not want to say de facto, but accepted. It's kind of gone through those risk trials, so people aren't afraid of it anymore. But doesn't that kind of take away from the PAM side, or do you have a way to where you enhance that as well?
Oh, I think it absolutely changes the value equation for traditional PAM for sure. So because traditional PAM is, enterprise password manager, right? So it's a
Yeah.
very heavily vault oriented, right? It's a very expensive password manager, right? So because of that, with passwordless and with cloud managed identities, that the
Mhm.
vault just doesn't really have a job anymore. Okay.
Yeah.
So our product, because we're a proxy that's built in the cloud native era, if you happen to have a traditional vault sitting around, like we're going to tie in those credentials, that's fine. But if you actually access your systems by just assuming an STS token for that, for that temporary session for that target system, well, our
Yeah.
proxies are just going to act, in that fashion. Okay. So really what I would say is that fits in perfectly with passwordless because it's still confirming the identity of the principal. The user is still getting in with passwordless. And then
Yeah.
let's say, the final target resource, again, that might expect a cloud identity. Well, our proxy is just adopting that identity on behalf of your end user. So we're able to tie that with high fidelity to that, maybe even biometric, right? Maybe FIDO2, maybe passwordless passkey, whatever it is for that user. And then we're
Okay.
able to continue that passwordless story through the machine to machine side of it, right? So that we're using cloud managed identities. Okay. And then again, if there's some remainder that's in a traditional vault or it's in, Azure Key Vault or in Hashi Vault or something like that, well, we're using that too. So we're really blending all of those sources of secrets and identities together again, but retaining that end user experience of I don't need to know about any of that. I just need to
Yeah.
authenticate and then I'm delivered to my destination.
Cool. So I just had a talk with Eric Leach. We were talking about kind of the future tech that's coming out and where things are going. And two of the big things that popped up are continuous authentication and then kind of the leveraging AI ML machine learning for continuous risk-based auth and things like that. So let's take, from a continuous auth basis, are you working towards continuous auth? So that's where after someone's authenticated on their desktop and they have their client, how are you continuously monitoring to make sure they didn't walk away, someone else sat down that's nefarious and they're running through and doing what they want to get done?
Sure. So I would say it's definitely worth noting that really the only way that our product works is continuous. So
Okay.
there's nothing really batch oriented or total session oriented. And I'll just use a couple of examples. So in terms of the authorization model, our product isn't ABAC or RBAC, it's StarBAC. Okay. So we are
What is
blending
StarBAC?
together.
Sounds like
Well,
Starbucks.
StarBAC, asterisk back is just
Oh, got you. Okay.
whatever you want base access control. And so what that means is if you have a role change, what we would regard as upstream in the identity provider, so let's say an Okta,
Yeah.
well, that event is going to be broadcast to us in real time, okay, right, through the SCIM protocol. So we're going to know immediately that a role change, a group change has happened, right? If your OU has changed or something in AD. So all of that is propagating in real time. And then we're merging that with streams, like, for example, from the major EDR vendors, right? So we have endpoint signals that are coming in too. So if your device risk score changes in real time, all of that is being sensed and then
How would my device
broadcast
risk score change?
because you went to an awesome website that maybe wasn't so trustworthy. So the moment
Okay.
you do that with our product, it's not just that your client is going to clench up. Actually, the whole conduit is going to collapse. Okay.
So who's doing that risk of like kind of mediation? How's that happening?
Yeah. So
Is that third party, or are you doing that internally?
Well, actually, I mean, the best folks in the world at doing that are, they're going to be your CrowdStrike and SentinelOne and folks like that, right? So we have direct integrations with those products that are then feeding in through this common. You can think of it as a signals API, right? That then is merged into whether this particular gesture, this particular byte, this particular packet at this moment can flow from Justin to that Oracle database.
Okay.
Right. And if all of those conditions aren't met, then that packet shall not flow. Okay. And we react to that in real time.
So if someone has access to the desktop, it's up to the enterprise to have desktop control of, hey, look, if someone stepped away and they didn't take their CAC card with them, that's on you with your policies. We're just another piece of software. You need to protect that. That's not our realm. Like, you're not even going to touch that part. We're going to focus on what we do best, which is, our privileged access into the systems.
Yeah. And but I'll say, like, so if anything that's related to the authentication, if it's some hardware based or something, well, again, we're going to have, because we exist on the desktop, we're going to be able to read that. We're going to flow it into the authorization that is continuous. So I'll just say, like, it all fits. How the particulars of how you do it in your enterprise, it just depends on which authentication system you're primarily reliant on and how you feed that in real time. But once you do, we're cutting that connection to the millisecond.
Okay, nice. Now, okay, so milliseconds, latency. What type of latency is involved when interacting through StrongDM into these backend systems? Well, I'm running SQL queries, or I'm trying to do logins or system accounts running something. How's that kind of work out?
So obviously there's just speed of light, right? So that's the first thing to understand. As long as your routing through the proxy network is, approximates the same distance that you had with your VPN or your ZTNA or whatever else you were using to get from the user to the system. Okay. So as long as you're not routing, to go from east to west in the US, as long as you're not routing through Mumbai to get there, then you're going to be okay.
So is your service all on-prem, or is it cloud-based for decision-making?
So you should think of it as there's a control plane, which is typically our SaaS, okay, and then that control plane is actually coordinating the actions of multiple network nodes that originate on the desktop, but also can just exist, in your CI/CD pipeline for those machine-to-machine cases, and then that traffic is conducted through instances of the proxy that you host. Okay, so you as a customer decide, hey, I've got 5 geos. I'm going to deploy 4 nodes in each of the geos, and then those nodes actually, depending on how you configure your network topology, then mesh to each other, and then form a layer 7 network, basically, trying to optimize routes through that network. Okay, so they mesh together, and that's how your east-west traffic is conducted.
Can this be used in non-internet networks like Milnet or some type of closed darknet type stuff where there is zero internet traffic? We still pull it all on-prem?
Yes. So in most of the architecture in principle doesn't have any internet dependencies. So it's really just a question
Nice.
of the SaaS really.
Yeah. Yeah, because everyone's moving to the cloud, and I think that's great. But I mean, so many times the cloud goes down or the internet connection is severed for some reason, or sometimes just pulled for security risks. So like, hey, there's some breach happening, boop, and all of a sudden you from a PAM side, that's when at first it was always about internet,
Yeah.
or sorry, like identity access, like, oh, you can't log into things. Like, it's not the end of the world. Customer can't log in for a few minutes while you're fixing something. But if you can't access your production accounts in as the system administrator because something's broken, that's when all hell breaks loose.
Yeah, it's a very interesting case. Sometimes even your systems submerge underwater. That's one that happens. If you've got a vehicle that goes underwater, then
Like
you
right
can't get
now
the
out in New York
yeah
City where we're flooding
yeah
like crazy.
yep. Yeah, so that's an interesting case. We have a lot of fun helping customers solve those problems too.
So this is just my naivety. So do you have anything more than the desktop client? Do you work with like Internet of Things, like devices? Is there physical hardware involved that you can get that you do? Like kind of like elaborate to what you do that I just don't know.
So I'll say the kernel of the product is absolutely software. Okay, and so really anywhere where software can run is an appropriate ingress and egress. Okay, and
Okay.
transport. Okay, so that means if you want to run the nodes in a Kubernetes cluster or as a dedicated VM or anything, like all of those work great. Okay, um, in terms of the desktop experience for an end user, in terms of like a full screen desktop experience, you should almost think of it as a convenience and an understanding affordance. So you can actually search for your resources, you can favorite them, right? So it's sort of more of a UI affordance in terms of
Mhm.
how the traffic is conducted, how identity works. It works equally well in a containerized scenario or in a, let's say a Linux embedded device. We're probably not good. Probably don't go too far afield of let's say Linux.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have it running on my Raspberry Pis.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's what about Mac?
Mac.
Yeah.
Of course, Mac.
Well, you are
what,
from San
what,
Francisco, so I guess it's
no, I mean, if these chips are beautiful, and no, we got of course it's compatible with both the new architecture and the Intel architecture on Mac OS for
oh,
sure.
nice. Okay, cool. Yeah, I didn't really think. I mean, I use Mac for all my personal stuff, but a lot of times I'm, thrown into PC land whenever I get into the enterprise world.
No, yeah, you gotta support it all. For enterprises you need Windows. For people like me, you need Linux, and for also people like me, you need Mac. So you need them
Yeah.
all.
So, what would you say is like the perfect strong DM client? Like, what are they struggling with? What are their problems? And what they, where do you come in? Like, look, we would nail this perfectly. Like, who is that client for you?
Okay, so I'll just say, the messier the better, and the more forceful your compliance obligations, the better. And so the messier, I'm going to say, the more heterogeneity, the more diversity. Okay, I think if you are in a wall to wall GCP scenario and everything in your whole enterprise fits inside of Google's cloud, and you never
Mhm.
have any asterisks, no exceptions, everything's perfect. Google's IAM gives you everything you need. Well, then I don't know. We're not really going to help all that much, right? We're going to give you some additional workflows and reporting and so on that could be helpful. But if you talk about, I have a data center, I have 3 physical data centers, and all the 3 major public cloud providers, and I actually am trying to stitch this whole thing together into a cohesive authorization and privilege access reporting plane. Well,
Mhm.
there's kind of no other way than a product that really has the breadth that our product has, and which is
And what's
why
the
we
client
support.
size you go for? Like small, medium enterprise, large scale, worldwide? Like, where are you
Well,
kind of?
the bigger the bigger, the more complex, the better.
Okay.
So if you have a team of a dozen folks, we're going to solve your problem. It's going to be convenient, but it's not going to be your number one priority.
Yeah.
If you have hundreds and thousands of people in thousands of locations, it's going to wrangling this problem is going to be up on your priority list.
Okay, so now you're mentioning like so user base, right? So like some enterprises, they'll have like 50,000 employees. They obviously won't all need it, but your high level admins will. So let's say like 5,000 employees possibly that could be using your software on a daily basis. I mean, I'm gonna put this out there because this is on your website. Granted, this is probably like if someone buys one license, but you're saying what, like $70 per month per user, just out of the box? Is that right? Am I crazy? I feel like I'm crazy.
Sure.
I'm telling you, I feel like this is
Sure. So I'll just say the user base that is using our product all day long. If you look at the
yeah.
titles, okay, of the user, um, it tends to be the part of your staff that is working on extremely critical systems,
Okay.
and they're highly skilled. And their work is really important. Okay, and
Okay.
so you're
Well,
connecting
true.
your data scientists to the systems that they
Yep.
need to train the models. You're connecting your software engineers to to production and staging and QA. Like these aren't cheap.
Yeah.
It's not cheap work, no matter what. And so protecting that work is something that's it's not just like signing into your SSO with let's say a commodity identity provider. This is a much different,
So you're not
deeper
focusing on like
product.
the entire enterprise user base. You're focusing on like very select subset, kind of pinpoint of users
Yeah,
that access the massively highly important systems on a day to day.
exactly. If all you need is your Gmail and your Salesforce to do your job,
Yeah.
then you probably don't have the StrongDM desktop client. But
Yeah.
if you're using Tableau, if you're using Jupyter Notebook, if you're a systems administrator of any type, then you're doing a job that could have widespread repercussions if you aren't doing it carefully. Right?
So I've been talking obviously a lot about the desktop client. We've been going back and forth. Can you kind of, obviously we can't really see it, and for people that don't have a clue what I'm talking about, they won't really see this. But can you kind of walk me through just how the desktop client works? Like I sit down, what's the authentication that takes place? How do I prove to you that I am me and that I'm going to have access into these systems, and then grant me access? And then how am I actually getting into that server? Like let's go low level.
So, to the extent possible, if there's ever a standard or an established practice, we're going to choose that first, right? So,
Okay.
with respect to authentication, there's just a bunch of standards that we can just lean on, right? And they're all the ones you know. So, you're going to initiate your authentication from your workstation, but that's going
Mhm.
to jump over to Okta or Ping or Azure AD, right?
Mhm.
So you're going to be logging into one of those systems, and then those systems are going to have the first bite of the apple in terms of additional factors as well, right? So they're going to
Okay.
have additional hardware requirements or other properties. Okay, once that completes, what's happened on your workstation is you've generated novel cryptographic material for that session. Okay, and
Mhm.
then that cryptographic material is what's going to unlock essentially the east-west mesh to begin conducting your traffic into the systems. Okay, and then from there, if you were to look at your network interfaces, it's going to feel a lot like other networking technologies. Maybe the difference is that if you were to again inspect maybe the outbound network connection, it's going to look a little bit simpler because it's going to be a single TLS connection, and then
Mhm.
all of the other activity is going to be multiplexed through that.
Okay. So let me ask you this then. So a lot of these breaches that are happening, like that corporations are continuously facing, they're trying to prevent attackers from getting these credentials. So they're vaulting them, or they're restricting access where you have to check them out, or you have to have these specific roles and go through systems like yours to get access to them. But all of that disappears if I can get the login credentials from the $5 an hour across the seas help desk guy. So how can you help combat against situations like that?
So I would just say by creating a choke where your organization, everyone in your organization understands, hey, my entire engineering team, my entire data science team, all my Windows admins, everything goes through this choke. And all of this is gated on successfully completing authentication with my identity provider, which itself is monitoring for possible identity compromise, monitoring for, there are things that Okta and friends are doing to help
Yeah.
identify a possible
Okta.
compromise. Okay. And so so you're basically just giving you fewer places to look. And that's what we're doing to increase your likelihood of catching a compromise. Okay. And there are, for example, just because we have additional evidence about what machine we're connecting from, we can even do things like, gosh, it doesn't really make sense that the kernel version or the Windows version leaked. There was a discontinuity, for this session, and we could feed that signal back into potentially something that changes the risk score and potentially, suspends, requires reconfirmation, requires MFA. So I would just say there's a lot. As long as once you're reducing your surface, once you're creating one path, then you can reason about, now that we've got one path, how are we going to secure that? How are we going to add additional assurances?
Nice. So you're definitely focusing on the keys to the kingdom and making sure restricting access as much as possible, reducing risk, exponentially there. Where do you see yourself, like the company StrongDM, being, in the near future? Like, what other additional risks are you going to try to tackle next? Or are you just going to stay focused on, this is what we do and we're just going to continue this path?
Well, I would say we're absolutely continuing this path, except I'm going to redefine the path, because the path
Okay.
is not what many folks might think of as PAM. Okay.
Yeah.
The path is to pursue this age that we've now entered, which I call the age of authorization. Okay. So it
Okay.
took us a couple decades to agree on how to authenticate into systems. Okay.
Yeah.
But now we're doing that pretty well, right? We're all happy with our hardware. We're all happy with Face ID and everything else. It's working great. So we're pretty good at authentication. Okay. Authorization is mathematically a much bigger problem. Okay, so we're going to be in this age, right? We're going to have to do a lot more work in this age of authorization. Okay,
Yeah.
but that's where we're focused. Okay, and it is all of those fine-grained privileges that are happening that you maybe bundled together traditionally into a credential in your enterprise password vault called traditional PAM.
Mhm.
But that's not really what you're trying to accomplish. What you're trying to accomplish is, controls and then recording evidence around gestures and actions that are important to your business. Okay, that's our focus, right? And it's true that, like, RMRF slash, that's an important activity. Drop table is an important activity. But so is, like, I'm going to go into my SaaS application and invite an outside administrator into it, right? That's also an important gesture, right? And so really just creating this uniform plane of gestures and actions where we can talk about risk, and we're not coerced into lanes around specific technology, right? So that a button click in Windows is just as valid for talking about as a launch in Kubernetes, right? And so you can actually have a risk and an evidence and a procedure and a policy and a workflow conversation about both of those actions.
So you're obviously an expert in PAM and privilege access and protecting accounts to highly secured systems. So if we take this and kind of put it on its head and say, okay, the normal user, like my mom, what would you say to someone like that? We're like, hey, look, for your important stuff, like your bank accounts, your super important stuff where you have usernames and passwords and things to log in, what kind of helpful advice would you give them where, like, they're not going to have these third-party tools, or maybe there is like a end user third-party tool you can recommend? What advice would you give them to really protect themselves and their identities from getting jacked, from getting their bank accounts ripped off because someone scammed them out of their password?
I think that anytime I'm talking to my mom or or other places that aren't likely organized around enterprise security, gosh, I know it's 2023, but I still have so much love for just getting everyone consistent in their use of a password manager. So it's got to start there.
Do
And
you have
I
a
think we have a
recommendation for end user one?
well, I mean, I have a little bit of an opinionated preference. Like I would say find the one that suits you, and keep searching until you find one that suits you. But my recommendations wouldn't be outside of the
So how about this
set of,
then?
yeah.
Which end user password vaulting software, what features should they have to be considered like this is one that you should look at?
Yeah, I think really great synchronization between mobile and desktop. Really great filling, and then I think there's some extra credit around the possibility. I'm not sure about compromise alerts. I'm not sure how helpful those are. I haven't had a great experience with those, but
Mhm.
maybe just helping a little bit with at least thinking about whether you might need to rotate a password, or how you could change it.
Okay.
I also, this is a little bit of a controversial take, but I think that for maybe a typical consumer, considering if there's a typical MFA, time-based one-time password, I think putting it in the same password repository isn't sacrilege for a typical consumer case, because
Okay.
just losing it is worse.
Okay. And then the last thing is going to be about decentralized ID versus centralized. Like, we live in a world in the enterprise where everything is centralized. We have identity management with every account and every password stored in it. We have these very centralized owned systems. even if it's cloud-based, let's say I'm using ping, whatever, well, everything's still stored centrally with ping, right? EU is moving towards self-sovereign ID. From a blockchain perspective, I mean, we have like 30 million active users a month using Web3 wallets for authentication on a day-to-day basis. Where do you see decentralized ID coming into the play of enterprise?
Yeah, that's a question that I haven't, I'll admit, I haven't thought a lot about the identity side of it. The times it has come up for me is actually more on the audit evidence side, and actually bundling together a set of actions and actually rolling up to a ledger to say,
Okay.
hey, this thing actually happened, right? There's
So
actually
you're
some.
big into the immutable data source as an audit trail.
Yeah, I think there's some interesting things there, and then
I
at
love
some
that.
point,
So I agree with you
yeah,
completely.
yeah. I also think the different admissibility constraints for forensic evidence in different jurisdictions is also interesting. I don't think there's not any precedent I'm aware of that says like, gosh, blockchain is way better.
Yeah,
But just having some sort of an intellectual path to say, here's how we're watching the watchers. Here's how we've ensured integrity on what we said happened. Yeah, that's something where I just always think, gosh, it would be really cool to be able to say, yeah, and you can verify this over here.
awesome, cool. So is there anything that you'd like to plug or talk about that's awesome that's coming up that you'd like people to know about?
No, there's nothing specific other than, gosh, we're in the age of authorization. Don't be constrained to thinking you have a Windows problem or a Linux problem or a Mac OS problem or a Kubernetes problem or an Azure problem. Like these are just, it's all, it's all systems. You should be able to have the same level of assurance and the same feeling of warmth and happiness around all of them. So I just want to encourage people to expect more out of their products.
Awesome, man. And lastly, who do you think I should talk to next? Who should I pressure to come on and talk some crazy security stuff?
Who should you pressure to come on? I think you should find, and I don't know who, but you should find somebody who has some uh, who has some current battle stories from zero trust rollouts,
Okay.
maybe specifically in the public sector. I think there's some interesting stories brewing there right now. So I'd definitely tune in for that episode.
Cool. Okay. Awesome, man. Well, thanks. I appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun.
All right. Well, hey, thanks for the time.
Cool, man. I'll see you around. Have a great one.